Welcome to Living the Smarter Science of Slim, where we provide a scientifically proven lifestyle for long-term health and fat loss by eating more and exercising less, but smarter.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that. Welcome to the Smarter Science of Slim. This is Carrie Brown and Jonathan Bailor.
And I was scolded last podcast for talking too much, so I am not going to talk as much during this podcast, Carrie.
Oh dear. Well, if they want any science at all, you're going to have to say something because they won't be getting any science out of me.
Well, today, Carrie, we are going to talk about cholesterol and how eating fat will not hurt our cholesterol. Last week we talked about how eating fat will not make us fat. The week before that we talked about how eating fat doesn't make us any less healthy. But Carrie, you have a personal story about cholesterol and eating fat. What happened there?
I do, but before we do that, I want to completely railroad this episode for about 30 seconds.
Okay.
Because, a few episodes back, I was all excited because I'd bought a 12.5-pound weight, which turned out to be too weeny for me, and I had to go back and get a 20-pound weight.
Take it to the store.
And so I wanted to share my little exercise update.
Ooh.
And let people know that it's interesting what happens, because I've been doing these arm exercises with my 20-pound weight.
Your eccentric arm
exercises. My eccentric arm exercises with this 20-pound weight. But what I'm noticing is that it's not necessarily my arms that are changing. It's my middle that's changing.
Oh, interesting.
Which is it's really cool. But I just wanted to point that out because I want people to understand that they will get the results they want, but they might not get them in the order in which they think they will. So they may find their body changing in ways that aren't quite what they expect at first.
And Carrie, you're not just doing arm exercises,
no.
Though, right? You're doing eccentric exercise for your legs, for your back, for your chest, and for your arms. So total body.
But remember, because I didn't buy my weight until...
Yes.
So I've just kind of added the arm thing.
Gotcha.
But I've noticed now a decrease in what's happening around my middle since I added the arm exercises. And the one thing I remember you saying to me once when I just didn't understand any of this, you said to me, I said, how can you exercise your legs and make your arms stronger? And because there was that study that did that, and you said to me that it was like when a diabetic injects insulin, they only inject it in, say, their leg, but the effects of that are felt throughout their body, and it was a similar kind of thing. And so I think that's what's going on here, is that, adding the extra exercise of my shoulders and my arms is actually causing change in other parts of my body as well.
Causing a bit of a hormonal change,
right.
And that's causing a more of a global change. Right. And yeah, folks, this is, I cannot wait till we get into talking about how we exercise smarter. That's coming up here in a few podcasts. But what Carrie's describing is such a profound, the way exercise can be helpful is not in terms of burning calories, it's in terms of changing our hormonal balance. And it's awesome that you're experiencing that, Carrie, because it's sort of like this very small dose of a very potent form of exercise is having these macro whole body changes, which is awesome.
And because I'm catching the impatience disease from you, Jonathan, I couldn't wait till we got to the exercise bit to give my little exercise update. So there we go. No,
that's fair. Well, and for folks that don't want to wait, obviously you can go to the Smarter Science of Slim website. There's a bunch of free information on eccentric exercise. You could also, of course, read the book. And the gist of it is it's not about exercising for longer periods of time or even exercising more frequently. It's about using more resistance while you exercise. So things like weight training, things like interval training, a bunch of free resources up on the Smarter Science of Slim website. But what we eat, especially if we have a weight issue for carrying excess weight, take this to the bank. It's 90% of it, folks. Please do not see exercise as this sort of panacea, because it's not. Exercise cannot undo what an insane diet does. We have to take care of the eating first, and fortunately we can do that very easily because we can enjoy things like fat, we can enjoy all sorts of food. We just want to steer away from starches and sweets. We can eat as much as we want as long as we don't eat those things, and we can do that while losing weight, while benefiting our heart, and while not hurting and in fact helping our cholesterol. And that's what I want to focus on this week, because that is one of the primary objections you will hear when you start reintroducing whole foods that contain fat into your diet. Is people are going to say, well, isn't that going to hurt your cholesterol? And especially seafood. I talk about seafood really being in a class of its own. Like non-starchy vegetables, organ meats, and seafood are the sanest substances in the world. And organ meats and seafood they have a lot of cholesterol in them. So if you're like, oh my God, if I eat cholesterol, I'm going to screw my cholesterol, you're not going to want to go sane. We're gonna take care of that in this episode.
So here's my cholesterol story.
Tell your cholesterol story, Karen.
So, and this was, bear in mind that this was before I met Jonathan, but it's still relevant, and here's why. Because I did start eating, I read Taubes, and I started eating a lot of protein and a lot less starches. So that was all good. But my protein intake went up massively. And I gotta tell you, a lot of that protein was bacon.
It came along with some fat.
And sausages.
Absolutely.
And there was just a lot of protein involved. And cheese. I was eating a lot of cheese.
Yep.
So there was a lot of fat being consumed.
Yep.
And maybe more importantly, because cholesterol always seems to be linked to animal fat, 95% of the fat I was eating was animal fat.
Okay.
In the 4 months after I started eating like this, my cholesterol went down 100 points.
In how many months?
4 months.
Wow. Well, and we'll talk about, it's not necessarily about lowering our cholesterol necessarily, but certainly that's a powerful anecdote.
And
that's a powerful anecdote.
I wasn't trying to do that.
Absolutely, no.
I have an annual check where they run my numbers. I started doing this about 4 months before, and when I went to get my numbers, my cholesterol, which historically had been like, oh, we're going to put you on statins, and I'm like, no, you're not.
No, you're not.
And it was like 280, somewhere around there. It was super high. And then, I changed my diet, was eating a lot of animal fats and a lot of protein, minus 100 points right there.
Amazing. How many medications would you have had to be on to potentially do that pharmaceutically, whereas you could just do it through food and enjoy yourself and have no negative side effects? I mean, when you go on one drug, you have to then go on another drug because the side effect of that drug.
Well, not only that, but have you ever read the contraindications that come with a box of statins?
Oh, no, it's...
Frankly, I'd rather be killed by everything else than the things that you get through taking those drugs.
And not only physical things, but they're now showing mental, like dementia and Alzheimer's and even just short-term mental problems. Again, statins may play a role if we've exhausted all diet and exercise options, but to go on statins before going sane and performing higher quality exercise is not something I personally would recommend.
And let's face it, you don't want to deal with a carry that's even madder than the one you have to deal with now.
Absolutely. So, but folks, definitely cholesterol is a hot topic. So I really want to give you the science, hopefully in an accessible way in this episode. And let's start with some established institutions, because we hear lower your cholesterol and blah, 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 from these established institutions, but we don't actually hear the other side from plenty of other very established institutions. For example, let's look at this quote from the American Diabetes Association, quoting, "Although low-fat, high-carbohydrate diets are recommended in an effort to reduce the risk of coronary artery disease, the results of short-term studies have shown that these diets can lead to an increased risk of coronary artery disease." And let's do one other quick quote here. And remember a few episodes back when we talked about how a gentleman by the name of Ansel Keys is really started this whole fear of fat and then tying fat to cholesterol. While Keys was doing his research, the Federal Register, which is the official log of the federal government, was on record with the true scientific data at that time, which was, I'm quoting directly here, "The role of cholesterol in heart disease has not been established. A causal relationship between blood cholesterol levels and these diseases has not been proven. The advisability of making extensive changes in the nature of dietary fat intake of the people of this country has not been demonstrated." Oops. That's pretty cut and dry, and the data is just not there, Carrie. We're going to talk about it in detail here, but there never was and still is, there is just no proof that high total cholesterol causes cardiovascular issues. What we will see is that the ratio of our various forms of cholesterol to one another may have some bearing, but total cholesterol is completely irrelevant. Saying that total cholesterol is indicative of heart disease propensity is a bit like saying eye color is related to intelligence. Like it just
It's
does
not.
not. It's not.
Is that not why I'm so smart? Because I have green eyes?
It's not. In fact, Dr. Gordon in the American Journal of Medicine tells us that total cholesterol per se is not a risk factor for coronary heart disease at all. And in fact, Dr. Ravenskov, who we talked about in the last episode, analyzed 26 randomized and controlled trials which were designed to lower total cholesterol and therefore theoretically the risk of cardiovascular disease. So he looked at these studies in which there was a treatment group. So in the treatment group, people ate less food that contained fat and or took cholesterol lowering drugs such as statins. And in the control group, or the group that really didn't do anything, they didn't take cholesterol lowering drugs, they didn't eat any less food that contained fat. Now, across these 26 studies that had this type of a setup, the individuals who took cholesterol lowering medication or ate less food containing fat had a higher incidence of just total death rate, and the incidence of fatal heart attacks was equal across the groups. So more people in the group that tried to lower their cholesterol ended up dying, and there was no difference in heart attack rates. And the researcher concluded lowering serum cholesterol concentration does not reduce mortality and is unlikely to prevent coronary heart disease.
So why put yourself through the misery of eating low-fat food if you're going to have the same propensity to die?
And it's really unfortunate, Carrie, because similar to what we talked about with calories, there's just this fundamental biology which has been lost. And that's, again, remember, humans stayed slim and avoided diabetes long before we even knew what a calorie was, let alone counted them. That's because the body automatically regulates mission-critical functions, such as energy balance. The body also regulates cholesterol levels, meaning that if we never ate cholesterol, our body would just upregulate the production of cholesterol. And if we eat a lot of cholesterol, our body makes less cholesterol. Again, our body is always trying to stay in homeostasis. So this idea that if we eat more cholesterol, bad things are going to happen, no, our body's just going to help compensate for that.
Because our bodies are awesome.
They are awesome. They're designed to keep us healthy, and we seem to have potentially lost sight of that because there's a much bigger market in thinking that we're broken and we need to take a bunch of medicine to fix us, whereas in reality, if we just avoid things that break us in the first place, we can stay healthy pretty easily.
And our bodies are pretty incredible when it comes to recovering from the damage we've inadvertently done through listening to all this bad marketing, bad science, whatever you want to call it.
So, Carrie, let's step through this piece by piece by piece, because listeners may even need to have some conversations with their physicians. After learning some of this information, maybe you could hand your physician a copy of the book or a copy of some of Gary Taubes' work, because the research is there. It's just that not all of us have heard it, including primary care physicians in many cases. So for foods that contain fat and cholesterol to be killers, 3 points have to be proven. This is very simple logic. Point number 1. Eating natural food that contains fat leads to risky levels of cholesterol. Okay. Second point is that these levels of cholesterol cause cardiovascular disease. And then the third point is that the diet outlined by the government's guidelines, aka a low-fat, low-protein, high-carbohydrate diet, improves these cholesterol levels. It is a fact that none of these things have ever been proven. It has never been proven that eating natural foods that contain fat lead to risky levels of cholesterol. It may lead to a higher total cholesterol, but we'll get to why that's not necessarily risky in a second. It has never been proven that these levels of cholesterol cause cardiovascular disease. A significant proportion of individuals who suffer from cardiovascular disease have very low levels of cholesterol. And finally, it has definitely not been proven. In fact, the opposite has been proven in the sense of that the government's high starch, low fat, low protein diet improves cholesterol levels. Absolutely not proven.
That's amazing. Why don't we know this?
Well,
Don't get me started.
Don't get me started. Well, we will talk about the big business of bad health. Actually, that's what we're going to talk about in the next couple podcasts. But let's get back to a little bit of direct quotes from the researchers here. Dr. German from the University of California really eloquently and succinctly summarizes the state of cholesterol research with the quote, "The approach of many mainstream investigators has been narrowly focused to produce and evaluate evidence in support of the hypothesis that dietary saturated fat elevates LDL cholesterol and thus the risk of coronary artery disease. The evidence is not strong, and overall dietary intervention by lowering saturated fat intake does not lower the incidence of non-fatal coronary artery disease, nor does such dietary intervention lower coronary disease or total mortality." Again, we get into this scenario like we got in a few podcasts back where researchers are trying to prove this right because they get their funding from the government that told us that it was right in the first place. And even that they're trying to prove it right, they still can't. Like, they still can't prove that this is true because it's not.
Uh-oh, he's going to start banging on the table in a minute. I can tell.
So,
getting all excited.
Well, no, and in fact, Kara, I am getting excited because sane foods that contain fat have never been proven to lead to risky levels of cholesterol. In fact, studies have shown the opposite. They've shown that the high-starch, low-fat, low-protein diet promoted by the government's guidelines has been proven to worsen the type of cholesterol that has been shown to decrease the risk of heart disease, HDL cholesterol. And let's pop up just real quick here, Carrie, because this is where the confusion comes up. We shouldn't just talk about cholesterol. We need to talk about the different types of cholesterol. There's quite a few. Let's just simplify it here and say that there's two major ones. There's LDL, which is low-density lipoprotein, and HDL, which is high-density lipoprotein. Traditionally, HDL is thought of as the good cholesterol, and that is backed by science. LDL is thought of as the bad cholesterol, and that's not necessarily supported by science. There is a difference in particle size of LDL, but that's complexity that we won't get into in this podcast. We have to have cholesterol because if we don't, we cannot produce new cells, we cannot produce hormones. Even if we never ate any of it, our liver or our intestines would produce it. So we don't just want to talk about cholesterol, we want to talk about the ratio of LDL to HDL. And then when it comes to predicting heart health, the American Heart Association, the International Diabetes Federation, and the World Health Organization. So this isn't some fringe group. These are about as big as they get. They all agree that low HDL cholesterol, not high LDL cholesterol, is what matters.
And the science backs that up?
And the science backs it up completely. Okay. So if low HDL cholesterol is the major problem here, why are we talking about lowering cholesterol levels? Lowering HDL cholesterol is terrible for our health.
Because if we didn't, we couldn't prescribe everybody statins and make a bunch of money, Jonathan. Get with the program.
Well, that's absolutely fair. And the point here, folks, is that, again, it's still a pretty crude measurement, but when we want to talk about relative risk of heart disease, in terms of cholesterol, we have to look at the ratio of HDL to LDL. And I have a chart here, which I'll share in the show notes, which kind of looks like a battleship grid where you've got level of HDL going up the vertical axis and the level of HDL running across the horizontal axis. And the point is that if you have a high level of HDL, it really doesn't matter what your level of LDL is because that HDL is going to take care of you. That's really what matters, is if you can get your HDL high enough, your level of LDL doesn't really matter. So if that is the case, so one, total cholesterol is irrelevant. If someone says their total cholesterol is 185, their risk of heart disease could either be huge if they have an incredibly low, for example, if they had like a HDL level of 25 and an LDL level of 160, they would have a very high level risk of heart disease because of that ratio, that low HDL. But if they had, for example, their HDL was at like 85 milligrams per deciliter and their LDL was at 100, well, then they have an incredibly low risk of heart disease. So even if you're like, oh, my total cholesterol is 185, it doesn't tell you anything. Similarly, if your total cholesterol is 245, again, you could either be on the right track or the completely wrong track, depending on that ratio.
That's awesome.
We're about increasing HDL cholesterol rather than decreasing LDL cholesterol. High HDL cholesterol protects us from heart problems more than dropping our LDL levels ever could. So heart healthy, and folks, please like burn this into your brain, because you will see things like heart healthy on starch and sweets in the store. They're like, it's heart healthy because it lowers cholesterol. Heart healthy is not about lowering total cholesterol. It's about raising HDL cholesterol. And those insane starches, folks, they do lower total cholesterol because starch lowers both HDL and LDL. Saturated fats, the thing that we've heard so much about, that's going to raise your total cholesterol because it raises both HDL and LDL, whereas unsaturated fats, the fats we find in plants and seafood and lean meats, they raise our HDL while lowering our LDL. So those are like the best for us. And things like saturated fats are neutral. And then things like starches, these things that the very things we've been told are heart healthy are not, because they drop our HDL, which is the most important thing in terms of we actually want to raise that.
Well, and I just want to say that if some of you are out there going, wow, I will never remember that. That was too much information. I've got my LDLs and my HDLs all muddled up. Here's the thing. Eat sane. You don't have to worry about it because it'll all take care of itself.
Yes,
That's
absolutely.
what I do. I mean, I don't think about cholesterol or HDL or LDL. I mean, when I go have my checkup, I'll get my numbers, but that's once a year. And between that, I don't even think about it anymore. I eat sane. It's all good.
It is all good. And there is a wealth of evidence to support this. And again, if you want to be heart healthy, you want to raise your HDL levels. And the way you do that is by eating more whole foods that contain fat and less starches and sweets. And again, there's a wealth of evidence to support this. For example, Dr. Mensick from, I don't care, how do you pronounce that? I think it's an English school. Maastricht University.
It's not English, but.
Oh, it's not.
No.
Well, fine.
We don't spell things with two A's together.
They tell us that there is a wealth of evidence that increasing the concentration of HDL cholesterol through diet will lower the risk of coronary artery disease. And then Dr. Dupreis from Laval University tells us that low HDL cholesterols increase coronary heart disease risk. Programs resulting in an increase in HDL cholesterol levels could decrease the incidence of heart disease. So, Carrie, any diet that causes us to lower our HDL, regardless of what it does to our LDL, is doing more harm than good. And if we replace sane sources of fat with insane starch, we will drop our HDL cholesterol. Yes, we will also drop our LDL cholesterol, but who cares? The cart's already left the stable. Our cholesterol is worse off, and that's why Dr. Mozafarian at Harvard University wrote, quoting, "Focusing on the effects of total and saturated fat on total and low-density lipoprotein, or LDL cholesterol, may have failed to reduce coronary heart disease risk and inadvertently worsened insulin resistance and weight gain." And Dr. Garg in the Journal of the American Medical Association, or JAMA, follows up with high carbohydrate diets caused persistent deterioration of glycemic control and the accentuation of hyperinsulinemia, which is basically just the things we talked about earlier about the prediabetes and poor insulin regulation, as well as increased very low lipodensity protein, which is the bad form of cholesterol. But again, this is what we've been told to do, because when we eat starches and sweets, we lower our total cholesterol. But why would we ever want to do that? And it's not, Carrie, this isn't even new data. Lowering HDL cholesterol has been known for decades to destroy our health.
So the takeaway is eat more bacon.
That is not the takeaway. I would say the takeaway is that if you want to enjoy bacon as part of a sane, balanced breakfast, this is the official position of the Smarter Science Slim, that would be fine. But what we don't want to do is swing the pendulum in the other direction But yes, of course, you can enjoy bacon.
That was my point.
Yes, you can enjoy it. But just to drive home, folks. So I'm gonna. This is an area that I feel passionate about because high cholesterol runs in my family. So I've had extensive conversations with my parents as I am interested in their health, and they have been, taught the conventional wisdom, which is just patently wrong. So again, this isn't new information. In the February 1989 issue of the Diabetes Care Journal, put out by the American Diabetes Association, again, not some fringe, extremist group, they did a study comparing the government's diet, again, high starch, low fat, low protein, with a more sane way of eating. The study concluded, quoting, VLDL, or bad cholesterol, was significantly increased. High-density lipoprotein, or HDL, the good cholesterol, were significantly decreased after consumption of the 60% carbohydrate diet. Then comparable results, and Carrie, this will hit home for you, were found with the equally imbalanced UK dietary guidelines. And in the words of the University of Glasgow researcher, Carrie, you got to say that?
I have no idea what that says.
It's arsofrani. I can write it, but I can't say it.
Something.
Mr.
A.
Mr. A responded with, following the UK dietary guidelines resulted in changes more likely to favor an increased risk of coronary heart disease. So, Carrie, it's not new information.
And that's just reminded me when you said University of Glasgow, I think the rate of, I think I'm right in saying that the rate of heart disease and all of that bad stuff in Scotland is really, really high. And you know what it is? It's all that porridge.
All that porridge?
It's all that oatmeal that is not heart healthy at all, as it turns out. And
Absolutely.
if they ate more haggis and less oatmeal, they'd all be a lot healthier.
And folks, this is just why it's so clear, right? Because you go repeat what Carrie just said to someone, and here's what they'll say to you. But oatmeal has been shown on the box. It says it lowers total cholesterol. It does. But remember, that doesn't matter because it's lowering HDL, which is worse. That does more harm than lowering LDL does good. And even saturated fats, which Carrie is so fond about, Jesus, and even saturated fat, about which so much has been said, like every other week there's some study about saturated fats. Here is what the American Heart Association, now this is crazy, Carrie, because these are the same people that accept hundreds of thousands of dollars from food manufacturers to put heart healthy labels on their high starch, low fat products. These same people have said, I'm quoting directly from the American Heart Association.
He's waving his arms.
Here it is. American Heart Association. No adequately designed randomized controlled study in the general population has shown that decreasing saturated fat intake significantly decreases coronary heart disease mortality. Translating, there is no data at all that supports that if you eat the foods that they get money to tell you to eat as heart healthy, there is no data to support that at all.
I'm going to come in with a black eye tomorrow because Jonathan inadvertently whacked me in the face while he was waving his arms around, getting passionate about fat.
False.
I have to say, no, my boss actually...
Where's this going? My boss actually does hit me in the face.
My boss said to me the other day about breakfast, because he normally eats breakfast in the office, and he likes porridge because he's also British, and or oatmeal. And I said to him, "You don't want to eat that?" And he said, "I don't." And I said, "No." And he said, "What do I want to eat?" And I said, "You want to eat bacon and eggs." And he looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But he did eat bacon and eggs.
Well, and let me just add my thing here, Gary. So a couple things. I would recommend as part of that breakfast some non-starchy vegetables.
Right.
So not just bacon and eggs. And the other
baby
thing,
steps, Jonathan. Baby steps.
That's good. And then another for individuals who may be tempted to overdo it with bacon, because I know there are some individuals who could just eat bacon like potato chips and they just can't stop. Ham is also a wonderful breakfast meat and gives you a lot of the same kind of flavor. So it's pork product, another good option. All are good. The point here is that fat does not There is no data to show that fat harms your cholesterol. In fact, what the data does show is exactly the opposite, that certain fats, such as unsaturated fats, such as specifically omega-3 fatty acids, I'll talk about some good sources for those in a second, those fats, not only do they raise your HDL, which we've talked about, that's wonderful, they also lower your LDL. It is a fact that if you want to improve your ratio of HDL to LDL cholesterol, the best way to do that is to increase your consumption of polyunsaturated omega-3 fatty acids. And those are most easily found in seafood, things like flax seeds or chia seeds. And you know what? Those are fats. So the studies show us, well, basically here, don't take my word for it. Take Harvard University, which says, quoting, limiting unsaturated fats, what I just talked about, which is usually done by increasing carbohydrates, is detrimental. Low-fat, high-carbohydrate diets provide a higher glycemic load, aggravate hyperinsulinemia, which again we talked about, that's insulin regulation, and may thus increase the risk of diabetes and coronary artery disease. Sadly, we have been told to do exactly the opposite of what science has shown. We've been told to take whole food, natural sources of fat to replace them with starches and sweets. This pretty much wraps up the government's involvement in this whole role, and the short version is that basically the government told us to do exactly the opposite of what we should be doing, and that's really, really unfortunate, but kind of makes sense if you look at what's happened to our country from when the exact moment the government got involved in health. Our health has gotten worse. So it's gotten precipitously worse the more involved they've gotten, and it was fine before they got involved. But then, sadly, big business jumped on the bandwagon because producing starch and sweetener-rich food products, that is just a whole new industry. It's a $1 trillion plus industry, and once we get into that, we're going to kind of see the full picture of what we're up against, but then we'll also have a full picture of how we solve it. And fortunately, the solution is quite simple. It's just eat food.
Well, you and I are going to have to sit at opposite ends of the studio because we're both going to end up with black eyes with all the arm waving that's going to go on during that podcast.
I love it. So coming up next, folks, big businesses' role in this insane scenario we find ourselves in today. And Carrie, do you have any closing remarks about our cholesterol conversation?
Well, other than I really want to say eat more bacon, but I'm scared you'll slap me. So I'm just going to say, keep it simple, people. I don't worry about, I mean, understand the science that Jonathan told you, but don't try and think about that. Just if you eat sane, the cholesterol will take care of itself.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't necessarily, the reason that I stress the science is because, again, we've had this so beaten into our head that it's time to stop taking people's words for things, because that's what we did with the government, right? We just took okay, eat more starches and sweets. Okay, based on what? Oh, we have no data. Or based on what? Actually, there is data, but it reveals the opposite. Just take our word for it because we're experts. So that's why I want to provide the science. And yes, enjoy bacon, but also make sure you're enjoying some non-starchy vegetables along with that. Make sure you're getting your protein. And next week, it's all about big business causing big people.
Woohoo!
or either way, I don't know. Thanks so much for listening. Carrie Brown, Jonathan Bailor, eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. See you next week. Wait, don't stop listening yet. If you like the podcast and if there's other ways we can help you, please join us in the Smarter Science of Slim support group, which is freely available at the Smarter Science of Slim website, smarterscienceofslim.com. There you'll find all kinds of free recipes and success stories and just all kinds of fun stuff like how to help your kids go sane and just great community content.
And just one last thing before you go, if you wouldn't mind heading over to iTunes and up onto Amazon.com and leaving us a review, and then going over to Facebook and liking us, we would hugely appreciate it.